People hear a title like this, and they picture me standing in a sea of white faces, the one brown girl in a room full of white witnesses. Let me correct that before I begin. My Kingdom Hall in Decatur was black. It was built by black hands in 1987, and 2 of those hands were my grandfather's. So when I tell you I spent 14 years alone, I do not mean I was alone in the room. I mean something worse. I mean that for 14 years I was proof. I was the living evidence the organization liked to hold up. See, we are the church with no Negro section and no white section. Look at our beautiful, faithful Decatur congregation. Look at how Jehovah loves them all the same. I carried that my whole childhood, and I never once felt its weight, the way you do not feel the weight of the air. And I did not stop believing all at once. There was a day, an actual day, in a coffee shop on Memorial Drive, when I read a single page and could not stand back up as the same woman. I am going to take you to that day. I promise you I will, but not yet. First, you have to see the house I grew up in and the man who built it. Stay in the room with me while I do. Subscribe, not to do me a favor, but because somewhere there is a young sister in a hall like mine who needs to hear that the silence was never her fault. Tell me in the comments which pew was yours. Add your voice, so the next one hears it before it is too late. The first thing you saw when you walked into the Decatur West congregation was the literature counter, and behind it, in a glass front cabinet my grandfather helped install, were the bound volumes of the Watchtower. Green and maroon spines going back decades, gold lettering, the year stamped on each one. I dusted that cabinet as a girl. I was maybe 10. No, 9. It was the year before my grandfather died. My mother, Marcia, was a regular pioneer, 30 years of it, and she believed that a child who kept the hall clean was a child keeping her own heart clean. So on Saturday mornings, I ran a cloth along those spines and never once opened one. You have to understand what that hall was. It was ours. Brown carpet worn pale down the center aisle from 40 years of our feet. Metal folding chairs. The smell of somebody's sweet potato pie in the back for the fellowship after the meeting. Decatur West had been black majority since before I was born, black led, black built, and the white brothers in our part of the county went to a different hall closer to Buckhead. In our hall, a black girl could grow up and never once feel like a guest. That was the gift. That was exactly the gift my grandfather bought, Reverend Joseph Bennett. He was a Baptist preacher first, in the small black churches off the south side of Atlanta in the early 60s. He came up out of rural Alabama in 1948, part of the same migration that filled this city. And in 1968, he walked out of his own pulpit, in the middle of a sermon, mid-sentence. My mother told me the story 100 times, because a man from the truth had shown him that the Kingdom Hall was the only church in his Atlanta that did not have a Negro section and a white section. Everybody sat together. Everybody was a brother. In 1968, in Georgia, that was not nothing. That was water in a desert. He was baptized within 3 weeks. He was appointed an elder in 1976, and he served 32 years. And when he helped nail up the drywall of that hall in 1987, he was building a house where his granddaughter would never have to enter through a side door. He died in 2009, believing every word. I was 9. His funeral was the largest that hall ever held. I want to be careful here, because it would be easy to make my grandfather sound like a fool, and he was the least foolish man I have ever known. He was not wrong about 1968. The truth did give him something the Baptist church down the road would not. Both things I am about to tell you are true at the same time, and holding them both at once is the whole weight of this story. So I grew up inside his gift. I was baptized at 14 years old, in the year 2014, in a hotel pool at a circuit assembly, and my grandmother wept because I was the 3rd generation. I was a good publisher. I went out in field service on Saturday mornings along Memorial Drive with my best friend Imani. two young black sisters in modest skirts with our book bags, knocking on the doors of people who looked like us, and I was happy. I need you to hear that I was happy. The trap was never that it was all misery. The trap is that it was home. But there was a second thing running underneath the happiness, and I only have the words for it now. Every few years, the circuit brought visitors through, an overseer, sometimes brothers from Bethel, and they always wanted to look at us. We were the answer to a question no one asked out loud. When people accused the organization of the old things, of the things printed long ago, our hall was the reply. Look at Decatur. Look at how they love it there. And a child does not know she is an exhibit. A child only knows to smile for the visiting brother and to wear the dress her mother pressed the night before. I smiled for 14 years. For 7 months in 2021, I found out what the other kind of hall felt like. Trey's work moved out to Marietta for a season, and we started attending the Stone Mountain congregation, which was mixed and where the body of elders was white. I was 21, and I want to describe this the way it actually happened, because it was never loud, and no single piece of it would sound like much if I handed it to you as one sentence. It was the way an elder's wife touched my hair at the door and said how interesting it was when I had worn it in the smallest, most careful twist-out I could manage. It was the elder who praised me, out loud, in front of the group, for how articulate my comment had been at the Watchtower study, the way you would praise a child for a trick. It was that the black sisters in that hall were shepherded a little harder on modesty than the sisters who looked like the elders' own wives. Our skirts studied a little longer, our tone corrected a little sooner. There was a sister there my age who wore her hair natural like mine, and I watched the elders' wives keep a gentle, constant distance from her, the kind you would not notice unless you had learned to count. Nobody printed a rule. Nobody had to. There is a word I use for it now, and I did not have it then. The quiet stratification. Never named in the hall, never on the page, always in the practice. The gap between what the organization said about us and what it did with us. I lived 7 months down inside that gap, and I called it my own imagination the entire time. Because that is exactly what I had been trained to call it. And here is the part I am most ashamed of. I want to give it to you plainly, because I am not only the one this was done to. I was also, at least once, the hand that did it. My cousin had a daughter, a young publisher, maybe 16, and one Saturday out in service, she asked me a question. She asked why Jehovah had so few black brothers up at the top, on the governing body, when our whole hall down here was black. And I corrected her. I told her brother Samuel Hurd had been appointed to the governing body in 1999, so there was no ceiling, and that the arrangement reflected spiritual maturity and not color, and that she should be careful about letting that kind of thinking into her heart. I was 22 years old. I said it with love. I shut a door inside a black girl's mind, and I believed I was protecting her. That is what the system makes of you. It makes you the one who keeps the next one quiet. I learned later that my aunt had been on the other side of a smaller version of this her whole life. Aunt Diane. My mother's older sister, who joined the truth as a teenager in 1980 and married an elder named Robert Coleman in 1986. Diane told me, years afterward, sitting on my floor, that in the years before her own marriage, the council around her had been careful, always so careful, about who a young black sister ought to marry, about not creating stumbling blocks, about how certain pairings drew the wrong kind of attention. Never a rule, always a pressure. She said she used to think she had invented it too. Diane left in 2003. She faded, and then she was disfellowshipped, and my entire family shunned her for 19 years. My own mother would cross a room to avoid her own sister. I grew up understanding Aunt Diane as a cautionary tale, a woman who had thrown the truth away with both hands. I did not know she was the only person in my whole bloodline who had already read the ending of my story. I will get to the day now. I keep my promises. It was 2025. I was 25 years old and I was already out. I had asked Trey for a divorce in November of 2024 with no scriptural grounds. The Judicial Committee had disfellowshipped me, and my mother and father had stopped saying my name. So I was alone in a way my grandfather never was. And when you are that alone, you finally start reading the things you were never allowed to read. There is an archive online, kept by the people who left, of the old publications, going all the way back to the beginning. And one afternoon I sat in a coffee shop on Memorial Drive, and I typed in the year my grandfather was born, and the years before it, and I found the issue of the Watchtower from January 15th, 1929. I am going to tell you what was on that page carefully, because the truth is enough. That article carried the old American teaching, the curse of Ham, the same thing the segregated churches down the road from my grandfather's pulpit had used to justify what they justified, applied there on the page to people of African descent. To him. To me. Printed by the very organization he would give his life to, 39 years before he walked through its door, believing it had never once said such a thing. He never read it. That is the part I could not stand back up under. My grandfather, Joseph Bennett, joined the Truth in 1968 because he believed Jehovah's was the only church in America without a Negro section and a white section. And he died in 2009, having never once seen what the Watchtower had said about Negroes in 1929. He never knew the gap was there. The bound volumes sat in the library cabinet of our hall his entire life, the ones I dusted as a girl, and not one of us ever opened a single one. They softened the language later. Across the 1950s, they modernized it, quietly, and they welcomed us in, and they never once apologized for what came before, or so much as explained why it had changed. And in 1999, when I was still a baby, they appointed Brother Samuel Hurd to the governing body, the first Black American ever to sit on it, and my grandfather sat in my parents' kitchen and wept when the announcement came over the Kingdom Hall speakerphone. 63 years old, 31 years in the truth, weeping because he had finally seen a man who looked like him at the very top. My mother told me that story when I was 12, as proof of how far Jehovah had brought us. I sat in that coffee shop and I understood that one man appointed after 70 years does not unprint a page. And the belief did not break with a crack. It just quietly stopped holding my weight, the way a chair you have sat in your whole life one day simply does not. I printed the article. I drove out to my mother's house on a Saturday. She still lived in the brick ranch off Memorial Drive. And I laid the printed page on her kitchen table, and I asked her only to read it. She would not look at it. She would not look at me. She told me I was letting Satan use my hurt, and she asked me to leave her house. I want to be fair to my mother, because she is not the villain of this story. Marcia joined this organization at 19 years old, at her sister Diane's side, in 1985. And she has not been allowed to think a single thought outside of it in 40 years. She is as much a captive of the machine as I ever was. She cannot read that page, because if that page is true, then the house her own father built with his hands has a crack running down the foundation, and she has nowhere else on earth to live. I understand her. I even forgive her. And I still folded the page back into a manila folder and drove home. And I have not been the same woman since. I live in Decatur now, in a one-bedroom apartment on the second floor of an old brick building, close enough to the MARTA that I can hear the trains. I built a bookshelf out of pine and cinder blocks last winter because I left my marriage with 46 boxes and no furniture, and on the second shelf of that bookshelf there is a manila folder. The 1929 article is inside it. I do not take it out often. I do not need to. I only need to know which shelf it is on. Aunt Diane comes every other Saturday. She drives over from Eastlake with a sweet potato pie from a bakery on Memorial Drive, and we sit on the floor because I still have not bought myself a kitchen table, and she does not ask me about Trey, and she does not ask me about my mother. She lets me say whatever I came to say. 19 years my family shunned her, and she waited all of them out, and when I was finally ready, she was the one already standing there. She is what my mother could have been. She is the one link in the chain that did not break. I found my grandfather's old Baptist hymnal in my parents' basement when I was 10, and I took it with me when I left. Last spring, I played a Mahalia Jackson record on my phone in this apartment, alone. The kind of music the organization had always taught me was worldly, and I sat down on the floor and cried for an hour, because it turned out I had an inheritance no one had ever been allowed to hand me. My grandfather preached in that voice, before 1968. I am learning how to hear it again. Some Saturdays, Diane hums along without noticing she is doing it, an old hymn from before either of us was born, and the pie goes cold on the floor between us while we let the record play. My little sister Hannah got baptized 2 years ago, at 19. She is 21 now, and she lives in our parents' house, and the elders have told her that I am a spiritual danger. I do not get to speak to her, but she is the reason I say any of this out loud. She is the next young black sister they will marry into a good family in 3 or 4 years, and I cannot knock on that door. All I can do is leave the page somewhere she might one day find it. I picture the wedding they will build for her in a few years, the same pink book pressed into her hands the morning of it, and I cannot reach across that distance to warn her, so I write it down instead. A woman wrote to me a while back and said the elders in her hall only ever wanted to help her, that they loved her. I believe her. I want to answer her the way I would answer myself at 22. They can love you and still be the men who keep you quiet. Both things are true at the same time. I told you at the very start that holding both of them at once is the whole weight of this. So let me say it to you directly now, whoever you are. If you grew up in a Black Kingdom Hall in Atlanta, or in any hall anywhere on this earth, and you were told your congregation was the living proof that no ceiling existed, I see you. If you were ever the sister they wanted in the photograph for the visiting brother, the articulate one, the credit to the arrangement, I see you. If you have ever gone quiet in a white lead back room and told yourself you were only imagining the difference, I see you. And if you have ever read one single page you were never supposed to read and could not stand back up as the same person, then you already understand why I can never go back. My grandfather spent 32 years being the proof of something that was never fully true. I spent 14 years the very same way. I am done being anyone's evidence. The hall does not own you. I am the proof.